The Berlin Wall, built in August 1961, became the single most potent symbol of the Cold War, a concrete manifestation of the Iron Curtain Winston Churchill had spoken of years earlier. While it is remembered as the work of the East German state and its Soviet patrons, one man's political will, calculation and persistence brought it into being: Walter Ulbricht. As the leader of the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, from 1950 to 1971, Ulbricht combined ideological zeal, Soviet loyalty, and shrewd political survival instincts. His decision to push for, plan, and execute the closure of Berlin's open border reshaped not only Germany's history, but the geopolitical landscape of Europe. Walter Ulbricht was born in 1893 in Leipzig in the Kingdom of Saxony to a working-class family. His father was a tailor, and young Walter grew up steeped in socialist politics, joining the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the SPD, in 1912. World War I hardened his political views. After serving in the German army, he deserted in 1918. Embracing a radical form of socialism that saw parliamentary compromise as betrayal. In the turbulent years after the war, Ulbricht gravitated to the newly formed Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, becoming a committed Leninist. He proved an able organizer and propagandist, rising through the party ranks. His loyalty to Moscow was already evident in the 1920s, and it would define his entire career. With Hitler's rise in 1933, the KPD was outlawed, and Ulbricht fled to France, then the Soviet Union. In Moscow, he became a trusted figure in the Communist International, surviving Stalin's purges and demonstrating the kind of ideological reliability that Soviet leaders valued. He returned to Germany in 1945 as part of the Ulbricht Group, a Soviet-selected cadre tasked with establishing communist control in the Soviet occupation zone. His infamous dictum: "It must look democratic, but we must have everything in our hands," summed up his approach to governance. In 1949, the German Democratic Republic was proclaimed, and Ulbricht soon became its de facto leader, holding the post of General Secretary of the Socialist Unity Party, the SED. He quickly imposed a Stalinist model, centralized planning, state control over industry, and suppression of political opposition. By the mid-1950s, however, the GDR faced deep problems. The 1953 uprising, sparked by increased work quotas, was brutally suppressed with Soviet tanks, but it exposed the fragility of the regime. Ulbricht responded with even tighter control, but he could not stop the hemorrhage of citizens fleeing to the west. Between 1949 and 1961, roughly 2.7 million East Germans left for West Germany. The vast majority went through Berlin, where the border between the Soviet and Western sectors remained relatively open. In some months of 1961, 30,000 people left, many of them doctors, engineers, and skilled workers. This brain drain threatened the GDR's economic survival and its legitimacy. Ulbricht saw the problem in stark terms. Either the border was sealed or the socialist experiment in East Germany would collapse. But closing it meant risking a showdown with the United States, Britain, and France, whose forces occupied West Berlin. Ulbricht's relationship with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was central to the wall's creation. While Khrushchev initially resisted any dramatic move in Berlin, preferring diplomatic pressure, Ulbricht persistently lobbied for a physical closure. In meetings in 1960 and early 1961, he painted a dire picture of the refugee crisis, warning that the GDR might not survive another year. Khrushchev was not easily convinced. He feared that sealing off Berlin would provoke the Americans into a military response. Yet events worked in Ulbricht's favor. The failed Vienna summit in June 1961 between Khrushchev and President John F. Kennedy left tensions unresolved, and refugee numbers spiked to crisis levels. By late July, Khrushchev gave the green light for Ulbricht to act, on the condition that the move be framed as an anti-fascist defensive measure, not an aggressive provocation. In June 1961, Ulbricht gave a press conference in East Berlin. In response to a West German journalist's question about whether he planned to build a wall, he famously said,
Niemand hat die Absicht, eine Mauer zu errichten.
which means no one has the intention of building a wall. The statement was a calculated deception designed to buy time while final preparations were made. Barely 8 weeks later, he ordered the border sealed. On the night of 12th to 13th of August 1961, under the code name Operation Rose, East German police, border guards and army units moved into position. Supported by Soviet troops, they rolled out barbed wire and barricades, cutting off roads, tram and train lines, and even sewer connections between East and West Berlin. The initial barrier was crude: fences, barbed wire, and armed patrols. But over the next weeks, workers replaced these with concrete walls, guard towers, and a wide death strip patrolled by soldiers with orders to shoot escapees. Ulbricht's government presented the wall as an anti-fascist protective barrier meant to defend East Berlin from Western spies and saboteurs. In reality, it was a prison fence for an entire country. The wall shocked the world. In the West, it was condemned as a wall of shame, while in the Eastern Bloc it was hailed as a socialist victory. US President Kennedy, though outraged, opted for restraint, sending troops to reinforce West Berlin's garrison but avoiding a direct military challenge. The most tense moment came in October 1961 at Checkpoint Charlie, where US and Soviet tanks faced each other for 16 hours before standing down. The crisis underscored how Ulbricht's move had pushed the superpowers to the brink, yet neither side wanted war over Berlin. For Ulbricht, the wall was a political triumph. The refugee flow dropped from thousands a week to a trickle. This stability allowed him to invest in East German industry, housing, and social programs. But it came at a human cost. Families were divided. Escape attempts were met with lethal force, and the GDR became increasingly isolated. Ulbricht's propaganda machine insisted that the wall was a symbol of peace, but to much of the world it was proof of the regime's failure to win the loyalty of its citizens without force. Although the wall secured his position in the short term, Ulbricht's hardline economic policies and inflexibility eventually alienated both Moscow and his colleagues. In 1971, he was eased out of power and replaced by Erich Honecker, ironically the man who would later oversee the wall's physical expansion. Ulbricht died in 1973, still convinced that the wall had saved the GDR. In a narrow sense, he was right. Without it, the East German state might have collapsed in the 1960s. But history judged it as a monument to repression, one that would stand until the 9th of November 1989, when it fell to the cheers of a reunited Berlin. Walter Ulbricht's hand in the Berlin Wall's creation was decisive. His relentless lobbying of the Soviets, his strategic deception in public statements, and his meticulous planning for Operation Rose ensured that the wall rose swiftly and stayed in place for nearly 3 decades. For Ulbricht, it was the ultimate act of political control, the sealing of a nation within its own borders. The wall's story is not just about bricks, barbed wire, and guard towers. It is about a leader who saw in it the survival of his state and his ideology. In building it, Ulbricht froze the Cold War's dividing line in stone and steel, shaping the lives of millions, until history finally swept it away. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.